Chapter 6. The Long Goodbye. They tell you the date. It's there on the paper. Laryngectomy. Wednesday, 9 a.m. On one level, it's just an appointment, another hospital. On another level, it's a line drawn across your life. Before, after. They don't call it that, of course. They talk about surgical plans and resection margins and post-operative rehabilitation. They talk about survival. Given the location and recurrence, the surgeon said, the safest option now is a total laryngectomy. Remove the larynx completely. Create a permanent stoma in the neck for breathing. Permanent. The words sat between us, thick and unavoidable. You need to understand, he went on gently. This will mean you won't be able to speak in the way you're used to. There are alternatives we can explore later, electrolarynx, esophageal speech, but your natural voice, as it is now, that will be gone. Gone. Not weakened, not changed, gone. He kept talking, risks, drains, hospital stays, but I barely heard him. My brain snagged on the simplest part. There was now an actual, scheduled morning on which my voice would be cut out of me. All those years of fearing maybe one day had distilled into a calendar entry. "Any questions?" he asked. I had 1,000. None of them sounded like questions in my head. They sounded like screams. Instead, I asked, how long until then? He glanced at his notes. "We'd like to move quickly," he said. "The cancer is contained, but we don't want to give it time to change that. 2 weeks. Is that manageable?" Manageable? As if I were rearranging meetings. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out hoarse, already half ghost. 2 weeks." He nodded, satisfied. 2 weeks, 14 days, 336 hours. A finite number of mornings where I'd wake up, clear my throat, and still have something, however ragged, come out. On the drive home, the number crowded out everything else. 2 weeks. There's no manual for how to use the last of your voice, no checklist, no neat advice article titled 10 Things to Say Before They Take Your Larynx. All you have is this, a door closing, slowly, and the knowledge that every word you spend now is one you'll never be able to spend again in the same way. For a while, I did nothing with that knowledge. I went home, sat on the couch, and stared at the TV without turning it on. My throat felt thick, not just with fear, with significance. Even the most mundane impulse, to call out to someone in the next room, to answer the phone, to mutter at the kettle, suddenly felt heavy, important. I wanted to hoard it and use it all at once. I wanted to be silent, and I wanted to talk until my throat bled. The first person I told about the surgery was Mum. We sat at the same kitchen table where we'd sat after the diagnosis, where we'd sat 100 times before, talking about my speech, my seizures, my future. She listened as I explained, haltingly, what the doctors were going to do. "They're taking it," I said finally, hand unconsciously pressed to my throat. Her eyes filled. "All of it?" she whispered. I nodded. "They'll make a hole," I added. "Here." I touched the base of my neck. She flinched like I'd struck her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen clock ticked on the wall, indecently loud. I thought of being a child, blowing bubbles in speech therapy to practice breath. I thought of the years of being told to use your diaphragm, to support the voice. Now, soon, air would enter and leave my body through a new doorway. I'd have to learn my own breath from scratch. "They say there are devices," I went on, because practicalities were safer than feelings, "ways to make sound later." Later, Mum repeated, staring at the table. What about now? Now, the next 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks. I don't know, I admitted. She reached out and took my hand. Then we'll work it out, she said. Her voice shook, but the words were steady. Together. We sat there, hands clasped, the weight of everything unsaid settling around us like thick air. I thought I should say something profound. I love you. Thank you. I'm scared. It was all there, right on the tip of my tongue. We sat there, hands clasped, the weight of everything unsaid settling around us like thick air. I thought I should say something profound. I love you. Thank you. I'm scared. It was all there, right on the tip of my tongue. But the more important the words, the heavier they became. I'm tired, I said instead, feeling like a coward. She nodded, understanding more than I'd given her credit for. Of course you are, she said. Get some rest. The long goodbye didn't begin with a grand declaration. It began with small, almost cowardly silences. It took a day for the full shape of it to land. The next morning, I woke up and tried to say good morning out loud, the way I usually did when I came into the kitchen. Good morning, I croaked to the empty room. The sound was shredded, broken in the middle. Still, it was a sound. 19 mornings from now, there would be no version of that word. The thought kicked something in me. If words were going to be this numbered, I didn't want to waste them on the weather, on small talk, on how's it going. But that's not how life works. The first person to call was a mate from work. Heard you're going in for surgery, he said. You all right? I almost said, no, I'm about to have my voice removed from my neck, and I have no idea how to live afterward. But what came out was the standard lie. Yeah, I said, just getting on with it. We chatted about practicalities, leave forms, covering my tasks, deadlines. I hung up and stared at the phone. You had a chance to say goodbye, an accusing voice inside me whispered, and you talked about rosters. But the thing is, you can't turn every conversation into a farewell monologue. It would flatten the world, make it unbearable. So the last days of my voice were peppered with both kinds, the heavy and the trivial, the essential and the filler. Each time I opened my mouth, I had to choose. Is this worth it? Is this the sentence I want to spend? With some people, the choice was obvious. I rang my brother. He answered on the second ring. Hey, he said, how'd the appointment go? I swallowed. They're taking it, I said. Silence on the line. Your voice? He asked quietly. Yeah. Another pause. I could hear his breath. Shit, he murmured. We talked logistics, hospital, dates, Mum and Dad staying nearby. Then there was that moment, the space where you know you should say the things men in our family don't say often enough. I love you, I forced out, the words snagging. He exhaled sharply. I love you too, idiot, he said, voice rough. Always. On his end, the admission came easily, tucked into humor. On mine, it felt like pushing boulders through a narrow gap. I hung up, shaking. Not just from fear of the surgery, from the weight of all the other times I'd wanted to say those 3 words, and hadn't. Because it was hard. Because the moment passed. Because someone changed the subject before I could wrestle the sentence into shape. 2 weeks suddenly didn't feel like enough. How do you cram a lifetime of interrupted conversations into 14 days? You don't. You can't. You try, clumsily, to pick a few key ones. I made a list, on paper, in my messy handwriting. Names, Mum and Dad, my brother, 2 close friends, an ex I had never really said a proper goodbye to, my neurologist, in a way, myself. The list looked ridiculous, like planning a party. Final speech. Guest list. I felt sick writing it. Still, I started working through it. With my parents, the conversations were ongoing. Every cup of tea shared at the kitchen table seemed to want to turn into a moment. Sometimes we let it, sometimes we didn't. One night, I sat across from Dad in the lounge room. The TV was on, sound low, footy highlights, players crashing into each other, commentators booming. We watched for a while in silence. "How you feeling about it?" he asked eventually, eyes still on the screen. How do you think?" I said, a little more sharply than I meant to. He winced. "Yeah," he said, "stupid question." We let the commentators fill the gap for a bit. "I keep thinking," he said after a while, "about when you were little, speech therapy, how hard you worked, how hard we pushed." I looked at him. He kept his gaze on the TV. "I'm not apologizing," he went on. "I don't regret trying to help, but I do regret." He trailed off, searching. "Regret? What?" I asked. "Every time I made you repeat something until you got it right," he said quietly. "Every time I sighed. Every time I looked at the clock in those waiting rooms, like your words were taking too long, and that was your fault." I swallowed. This wasn't on my list. I hadn't planned for this. "I know you were trying," I said. "You didn't know." He nodded, jaw tight. "I know," he said, still. We both stared at the flickering screen. "I'm proud of you, you know," he said, voice rough. "Always have been, for sticking with it, for talking at all, when it was so bloody hard. And now," he stopped, cleared his throat, "and now you're going to have to learn a whole new way to exist," he finished. "Yeah," I said softly. "Looks like." He looked at me then. "I wish I could fix it," he said. "I know," I replied. "There were a dozen other things I could have said. You did your best. I forgive you. We both did what we could with what we knew. But the words were too big, too tangled, and our family only ever learnt one speed for emotion, brief, then back to the game." I let what we had said be enough. Not because it was, but because perfection had never once been an option in my relationship with speech. With friends, it was different. They weren't used to me being the one to initiate heavy conversations. I was the listener in the group, the one who chimed in late or not at all. Now I was the one sending messages. "Can we catch up before my surgery? Would like to talk properly." One mate, Josh, met me at a quiet pub on a Tuesday afternoon when it was nearly empty. We sat in a corner booth. I nursed a beer I barely tasted. He talked first, as always, filling the air with stories about work, his kids, the latest disaster in the news. I let him run for a bit. Then I cleared my throat. "I'm going to lose it," I said, cutting across him. He blinked. "Lose what?" he asked, thrown. My voice." The words sounded strange in the stale pub air. The color drained from his face. "Shit," he said softly. "Laryngectomy," I added, surprising myself with the clinical word. It gave me something to hide behind. He stared at me. "But you'll get it back, right? With that machine thing, or—" His hands fluttered vaguely near his throat. "Not this," I said. "Not my voice." He went quiet, really quiet for once. We sat there, the muted sound of the TV above the bar washing over us. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, eventually, honest in his helplessness. I thought about it. "Tell me you'll still talk to me when I can't talk back the same way. Tell me you won't treat me like fragile glass or like I'm no longer in the room. Tell me you'll wait." Instead, what came out was simpler. "Jay, just don't disappear," I said. He met my eyes. "I won't," he said, and for once I believed him. We talked for another hour, about music, Stupid memories. The time we got locked out of that hostel in Byron. We didn't wring the moment dry with sentiment. We didn't end on a Hallmark line. But as we said goodbye outside, he pulled me into a rough hug. "Love ya, man," he muttered into my shoulder, words almost swallowed by the traffic. "Love you too," I managed, the sentence feeling both ordinary and monumental. There were conversations I didn't have. An ex reached out when she heard through mutual friends. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here," she texted. I stared at the message for a long time. There were things between us that had never been said. Apologies, explanations, old sour jokes. Part of me wanted to call her, use my fading voice to untangle the past. Another part of me recoiled. I only had so many words left. Did I really want to spend them litigating an old heartache? In the end, I typed back, "Thank you. Means a lot. Hope you're well." She replied with a heart. That was it. Not every door can be closed in person. Some have to stay half open, half shut, lived with rather than solved. The hardest conversation, though, was with myself. Late at night, in the bathroom, I'd stand in front of the mirror and talk straight into my own eyes. "Yeah, you did. All right," I'd tell my reflection, sounding unconvinced. I'd list the things my voice had managed to do, despite everything. You held down jobs. You told people you loved them, eventually. You argued with doctors. You made strangers laugh, sometimes. You read whole books out loud, alone, just to prove you could. You didn't let their impatience erase you completely. I'd try to say thank you to it. "Thank you," I'd murmur, palm flat against my throat, "for what you could do." It felt ridiculous, talking to a part of my own anatomy. But my voice had always felt separate from me. A wild animal I'd spent my life coaxing into the open. It seemed polite, at least, to acknowledge its service before sending it to the slaughter. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, the house quiet, I'd feel every swallow, every tiny shift in my throat. I'd imagine the surgeon's hands, the scalpel, the snip. I'd imagine waking up with a tube in my neck, my mouth full of nothing. I'd start to panic, hyperventilate. Then I'd force myself to breathe slowly, deliberately. In through the nose, out through the mouth, finding the rhythm I knew I would have to relearn through a new opening. In the last few days before surgery, the world seemed to conspire to remind me what I was losing. I'd be in a supermarket and hear someone shouting, laughing freely down the aisle, their voice echoing. I'd stand at a crossing and hear a child calling for their mum, shrill, unrestrained. I'd sit on a bus and overhear two strangers deep in argument, voices overlaying, neither pausing for the other. I watched their vocal cords, unseen under skin, doing their work without thought. I wondered if they had ever once thanked them. Probably not. Why would you, when something has always been there? That was the difference. I had never once been allowed to take speech for granted. From the moment the first stutter hit, it had been work, visible, audible work. Now, at the end of that long, hard fight, I was about to be pressed into a new category. Not just man who struggles to speak, man who cannot speak. It felt like being evicted from a house I had built, brick by brick, even if the walls were uneven. The day before surgery, my neurologist called. I hadn't expected him to. Voice cancer wasn't in his jurisdiction. "Just heard from your GP," he said. "Wanted to check in." We talked briefly about medication adjustments, seizure risks under anesthetic. Before we hung up, he said, "You know, I've been listening to you talk for years. I remember when we first met, how hard it was for you to get through a sentence." I smiled, a little despite myself. "Hasn't got much easier," I said. He chuckled softly. "Maybe not," he said, "but you kept doing it. That is not nothing, Cal. Don't ever think it is. His words washed over me, strangely soothing. Someone who had seen me at my most medically vulnerable, who had watched my brain misfire and reset, was acknowledging the sheer act of showing up, of trying, not with pity, with respect. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself cry, properly, for the first time since the date was set. Not a few tears quickly wiped away, deep, ugly sobs that shook my chest and made my already raw throat ache. It wasn't just fear of the surgery. It was grief for the 40 years of trying, for every time I'd pushed a word out in the face of impatience, for every time I hadn't, for the little boy in the speech room staring into mirrors, the teenager seizing on library tiles, the adult in boardrooms half raising his hand and then lowering it, for all of us. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under. The morning of the surgery, the hospital lights were as bright and indifferent as they always are. I checked in, signed forms with shaking hands, got changed into a gown that gaped in the back. A nurse put a plastic bracelet around my wrist. Name, date of birth, allergies. No field for about to lose his voice. Handle with care. Mum and Dad sat with me in the pre-op area. We didn't say much. What was there left to say that we hadn't already? I squeezed their hands. They squeezed back. When the anaesthetist came with his gentle questions, any loose teeth, any issues with previous anesthetics, I answered as best I could, my voice already fading around the edges, whether from nerves or from sheer wear. As they wheeled me toward theatre, a thought rose up, fierce and irrational. I haven't said enough. It didn't matter that I'd spent 2 weeks talking more than I had in years, pushing through fatigue, through pain, to say the big things and the small. It didn't matter that I'd told people I loved them, that I'd thanked my parents, that I'd even tried to thank my own faulty voice. There would always be something unsaid, a joke that didn't make it in time, a memory I hadn't shared, a question I had meant to ask. That's the trick of language. It never feels complete. Just before we rolled through the theatre doors, the nurse stopped. "Any last questions?" she asked kindly. I wanted to tell her that was the worst possible choice of words. Last questions. I shook my head. As the anesthetic went in, cold in the back of my hand, the surgeon leaned over. "We'll look after you," he said. I believed him. This wasn't malice. It wasn't punishment. It was the only viable way to stop something that would otherwise grow until it killed me. I knew that. Still, as consciousness slid away, one thought burned bright. Goodbye. Not to my family, not even to my old life. Goodbye to a hoarse, stubborn, faltering voice that had never, ever given me an easy ride, but had been mine. The last sound I made before the drugs pulled me under was not a word. It was a fractured exhale, half laugh, half sob. Then there was nothing. No static, no rasp, no struggle. Just a deep, complete silence, swallowing the last of my old voice as the door closed behind it.